Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jordan and Camille had been married for almost 8 years and lived in Toledo, Ohio, where they'd built a quiet, low-key life based on mutual understanding. From the start, they weren't the kind of couple that made big public displays, but there was a silent pact between them of partnership and respect. Their relationship worked like a well-oiled machine. Each had their routine, their space, but everything came together around one central thing: stability. Jordan worked as a civil engineer at a regional construction company, a job he held responsibly, even if he didn't have big ambitions. He liked what he did and felt comfortable with the predictability of his days. Camille, on the other hand, was more dynamic. She worked in marketing for a major consumer goods company and always showed a natural enthusiasm for her job. The house they lived in was simple but well kept. A 2-bedroom townhouse, a front yard with lavender bushes, and a small porch where they usually had coffee on Saturday mornings. They didn't have kids, by mutual choice, but the absence of children was never a point of conflict. They preferred short trips during holidays, weekend binge-watching series, and impromptu dinners during the week when their schedules allowed. To friends and family, they were the couple who'd made it work, the kind who'd made it through the turbulent early years of marriage without any visible cracks and had found their own rhythm. The routine started taking on new shades when Camille began standing out more clearly at work. It started with praise from co-workers, then small internal recognitions, and then came the promotions. In less than a year, she moved up 3 positions. First she was promoted to supervisor of regional campaigns, then became manager of key accounts, and finally rose to deputy creative director. Her growth was fast, faster than the company's usual pace, but everyone seemed to agree she deserved it. She was articulate, creative, and knew how to lead teams with firmness and empathy. Jordan, in turn, greeted each piece of news with genuine excitement. He'd prepare special dinners to celebrate, buy flowers, send messages during the workday congratulating her on her achievements. He took pride in every step she took. There was never a moment when he showed jealousy, suspicion, or discomfort about the intense pace of her career. On the contrary, he made a point of praising his wife's success in conversations with friends and coworkers. He said Camille was an example of competence, and that seeing the woman he loved reach higher levels was a source of joy. She, at least on the surface, seemed equally happy. She'd come home tired but in good spirits, share work stories with Jordan, and still made sure to keep their couple's rituals intact. Friday pizza nights, slow Sunday coffees, and little everyday jokes remained steady, as if nothing had changed. Their dynamic showed no flaws. There were no serious fights, long silences, or sudden behavioral shifts. Camille kept the same soft tone of voice, the same thoughtful gestures, and Jordan stayed as calm as ever. When she mentioned longer meetings, short trips for strategy sessions, or corporate dinners, Jordan would just tell her to enjoy herself, rest when she could, and be careful on the roads. He never questioned anything. The trust between them seemed solid enough to withstand anything. In Jordan's eyes, they were in the best phase of their lives. A mature marriage, a stable home, careers moving forward, and future plans that seemed closer than ever. They talked about buying a second home in the countryside, maybe slowing down work a bit in the coming years, or even taking a sabbatical to travel. Everything pointed to a peaceful future. Camille never showed impatience or coldness. On the contrary, she kept calling him love, sending messages in the middle of the day, leaving sweet notes on the fridge door. And Jordan, carried along by this normalcy, never even considered that something might be off. To him, Camille was the same woman as always, maybe just busier and more recognized. The house stayed in order, the relationship flowed easily, and her career was just one more of the many achievements that seemed natural given her dedication. At no point did he imagine there could be any shadow behind that shine. Nothing in her behavior suggested distance, coldness, or lies. What they had was, to him, more than a marriage. It was an established partnership. And because of that, Jordan never prepared himself for what was coming. Because for someone who trusts blindly, the blow never starts with a warning sign. It starts with the absence of them. The afternoon started like any other, with Jordan wrapping up his work tasks and stopping by the house during his lunch break to pick up an important document he'd forgotten. He needed to send a report urgently and knew Camille sometimes used her own laptop to review files for him, especially when he asked for help with more elaborate presentations. When he walked into the living room, he saw her laptop on the side table next to the couch. When he opened it, the desktop appeared with a few tabs open. Without thinking much, Jordan sat down, clicked on the browser, and quickly searched for the folder where they usually kept shared files. As he minimized one window, he accidentally opened another. It was a private browsing tab with an email account open. Camille had definitely forgotten to log out. By instinct, he almost closed it. But the subject line of one message caught his attention, about the weekend, with a date from 2 days ago. The sender was Kenneth Blake. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Camille had mentioned Kenneth a few times before, always respectfully, saying he was the company's vice president and one of the people responsible for her latest promotion. He was an influential man, discreet, in his 50s. Married, father of 2 kids, as she'd mentioned. Until then, nothing suggested any closeness beyond the workplace. But that message sparked something he couldn't name right away. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds. Jordan clicked. The message was short, but the language bordered on intimate. Kenneth thanked her for a wonderful weekend in Lake Geneva and said he felt lighter every time they were together, away from the pressures and watchful eyes at the company. He also asked Camille to confirm whether she'd managed to resolve the issue with the corporate card used to book the hotel, and ended with a sentence that stuck in Jordan's mind: next time, no meetings to get in the way. The message wasn't explicit, but it was too intimate to be seen as just a professional thank you. Jordan's heart raced. Still not exactly sure what he was looking for, he quickly accessed the sent folder. He found other messages, archived in a folder labeled with the initial CNK, something he'd never seen before. The conversations there left no doubt. There were no photos, but the texts were clear. Flirting disguised at first, ambiguous phrases, exchanges of compliments loaded with double meanings. Then dates and times arranged for dinners, comments about their meetings, lines like, "I got lost again in your perfume," or, "When we're together, everything makes more sense." This wasn't friendship, nor was it just coworker camaraderie. It was an affair. And it didn't seem recent. Jordan pulled away from the laptop as if he'd touched something toxic. The air felt heavier. For a few moments, he sat frozen, trying to organize his thoughts. The first feeling was disbelief. Then came anger, followed by a dull ache in his chest, as if the ground had given way beneath his feet. Camille, the woman he admired, whom he'd always defended and supported, was involved with her own boss. Not just involved, but carrying on a hidden, ongoing relationship, complete with trips and dinners while he, at home, celebrated her promotions with pride. Jordan's mind spiraled. He tried to find explanations, looked for reasons that would make everything less devastating. He thought about confronting her that night, waiting for the right moment. But the anger wouldn't let him. The pain demanded an answer. He stood up, grabbed his phone, quickly took photos of the most incriminating messages, and left the house with his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. The drive to Camille's workplace seemed shorter than usual. Every traffic light was a test of patience. Each image of those messages replayed in his head, as if trying to deepen the impact of the betrayal. Arriving at the building where she worked, Jordan went straight to the front desk. He didn't have an appointment or a visitor request. He just said he needed to speak with his wife, that it was urgent. The receptionist, after confirming his details, called Camille's extension. A few minutes later, she appeared in the lobby. She was dressed as elegantly as always, hair tied back, light makeup. Her smile when she saw him was brief, but disappeared the moment she noticed his expression. Jordan didn't say anything right there. He just asked that they go to the parking lot. She tried to understand why he'd shown up unexpectedly, but he didn't respond. His silence was answer enough. When they reached the car, Jordan showed her his phone with the screenshots open. Camille's eyes widened immediately. She took the phone with trembling hands, read one message, then another, and handed it back in silence. She tried to say she needed to explain, that it wasn't what he thought, that things were more complicated. But Jordan, holding himself together, simply asked firmly, "Are you having an affair with your boss?" Camille hesitated. She blinked several times, as if searching for courage or the right words. The silence between them grew. And even without an answer, Jordan already knew the truth. He didn't need to hear anything else. The lack of denial was confirmation enough. And in that moment, the image of their marriage began to collapse from within, no shouting, no audience, just the silent pain of someone realizing they'd been deceived in the place where they'd felt safest. Camille stayed silent for a few seconds after Jordan's question, but her look said it all. Her eyes avoided his, her breathing was quick, and her hands, still holding the phone, visibly trembled. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was low, almost a whisper. She said denying it was pointless, that Jordan already knew. She tried to justify it by saying it had started unexpectedly, that there was no plan, no premeditation. She said she'd felt pressured, watched, that the company was competitive, and that Kenneth had approached her at a moment when she felt vulnerable and eager for recognition. Jordan just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't react. He only observed, as if every word coming from her mouth was the final piece of a puzzle he'd rather never have completed. Camille said the first more personal contact happened shortly before her first promotion. Kenneth began scheduling individual meetings, showing more interest in her performance, praising her work, telling her she had a future at the company. She, flattered, moved closer. According to her, everything seemed purely professional at first, until a dinner after a results presentation ended with their first kiss. She said she was shocked, that she thought about ending it right there, but instead, she gave in. And after that came more meetings, more trips, more excuses to be available outside work hours. The involvement with Kenneth, in her own words, grew quietly, hidden beneath the achievements everyone around her believed were the result of hard work and talent alone. Jordan listened, his eyes fixed on hers. His heart pounded, but his face stayed still, as if the pain was too great to show in any reaction. When Camille finished speaking, there was no argument, no shouting, no accusations. Jordan just took a deep breath, took his phone back, and said he wouldn't be coming home that night. Camille tried to move closer, said she needed to explain better, that she still loved him, that everything had spiraled out of control. But he stepped back, asked her to respect that moment. He said he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he needed to leave right then. And that's exactly what he did. Jordan drove to his parents' house, where he stayed silent until the next day. He didn't sleep. He spent the night staring at the ceiling of his old room, trying to figure out exactly when everything had started to fall apart. His mind spun through happy memories, messages exchanged over the years, trips, promises, celebrations. Everything now seemed tainted. There was no way to separate the good parts from the current wreckage. The betrayal had the force of an earthquake, leaving nothing standing. The next morning, Jordan got up, had a quick coffee, and called a lawyer. He explained the situation straight to the point, asked for guidance on the divorce process, and scheduled an appointment for that same day. He didn't want to delay, didn't want to wait for his emotions to cool. What he felt wasn't passing anger, it was the certainty that something had broken beyond repair. Trust was the foundation of their marriage, and now, with that foundation eroded, nothing else made sense. The process started that same day, but Jordan had no intention of letting everything end quietly and cleanly. This story wouldn't just be another divorce, it would be an example of how some betrayals come with too high a price. While the lawyers exchanged emails and drafted petitions, he worked in parallel on a plan he'd been forming since the moment he discovered the truth. Right after signing the divorce petition, Jordan made his first move. He sent the package of evidence to the company's ethics committee anonymously, but with every detail needed to guarantee the material's authenticity. This wasn't gossip, it was a clear case of misconduct, misuse of corporate resources, and an inappropriate relationship between superior and subordinate. At the same time, an identical envelope was sent to Abigail Blake's home, Kenneth's wife. The reaction was swift. Internally, the board met behind closed doors and launched a secret investigation. Camille, unaware the blow was coming from so close, only noticed that the office atmosphere had suddenly changed. Conversations stopped when she approached, strategic meetings were held without her, and projects she led were handed over to other managers. Friendly expressions were replaced by cold, distant stares. On the other side, Kenneth started feeling the ground give way beneath him. The charismatic, respected vice president began receiving fewer and fewer invitations to high-level meetings. His peers avoided him, and even the CEO, once a close friend, now treated him with the cold formality reserved for someone about to be discarded. The final blow came from home. When Abigail received the package of evidence, she didn't scream or cry. She simply hired the best family lawyer she knew and, in less than a week, filed for divorce. She left the house with both children, took half the assets, and demanded a substantial alimony. Kenneth, who until then saw himself as untouchable, suddenly found himself alone in a rented, cold apartment, with half his wealth and no credibility. The company didn't want headlines. Under the guise of strategic restructuring, they transferred Kenneth to the Boise, Idaho branch, a city far from major centers, where he took on an irrelevant administrative role. In practice, it was a humiliating demotion. Everyone knew. Especially him. Camille didn't escape unscathed. With no space in the corporate environment and no support at work, she was offered an amicable exit, a reasonable severance package, a confidentiality clause, and the promise that her dismissal wouldn't be made public. She accepted. Not because she wanted to, but because she knew she had no choice. When news spreads behind the scenes, the walls close in before anyone even realizes. The impact on the job market was devastating. Job interviews piled up, but always ended at the same point: compliments on her resume, polite smiles, and a "we'll be in touch" that never happened. Some companies admitted in private conversations they didn't want to import problems into their teams. Others offered roles far below her experience level, with salaries that barely covered basic expenses. Within months, Camille, once an admired director, found herself working for small consulting firms, poorly paid and without any prestige. She left the comfortable house she'd shared with Jordan and moved into a modest, distant, impersonal apartment. The white walls and constant silence were the exact reflection of her new life: cold, lonely, and without prospects. Jordan, on the other hand, watched from a distance. Not with laughter or celebration, but with the calmness of someone who knows justice has been served. He didn't need to raise his voice or confront them directly. He just let the truth, revealed at the right moment, do the work for him. Kenneth lost his marriage, his position, and his influence. Camille lost her reputation, her career, and her social circle. And in the end, both ended up exactly where they belonged, forgotten. For Jordan, it wasn't about blind revenge. It was about balance. They had broken something that couldn't be fixed, and now they were paying the price. He moved forward with his life, rebuilding himself far from that past, but carrying the certainty that if anyone ever asked why it all ended this way, the answer would be recorded in the same documents he'd sent: cold, undeniable, and deadly. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.